At 19 years old, Sadie Hawkins walked down the aisle of a cold stone chapel in a dress that was not hers toward a man she had never chosen, to seal a bargain she had never agreed to. Her stepmother had sold her, not with chains, not with cruelty disguised as love, but with the quiet efficiency of a woman settling a debt. And the man waiting at the altar, leaning on a silver-tipped cane, his dark eyes fixed on nothing in particular, was the Duke of Redfield, a man the whisper mills of society called broken, bitter, and best avoided. What no one told Sadie, what no one bothered to mention, was that behind those cold eyes lived a man who had stopped believing anyone would ever see him as anything other than his wound. And what no one told the Duke was that the girl marching toward him with fury stitched into every step of her white slippers was about to become the most inconvenient thing that had ever happened to him. Someone who refused to be invisible. If this story already has you, follow along. Drop a comment below. Team Sadie or Team Rupert? Let's see where the house stands. The drawing room of Hawkins' house had seen better decades. The curtains, once deep burgundy, had faded to a dusty rose that no amount of afternoon light could flatter. The silver on the mantel had lost its shine years ago, and the painting above the fireplace, a stiff portrait of the late Lord Hawkins, seemed to watch the room with the resigned disappointment of a man who had anticipated exactly this kind of decline. Sadie was seated near the window, a book open on her lap, her eyes not on the pages but on the garden below, where the gardener was losing his ongoing battle with an overgrown rose hedge. It was a Tuesday in early autumn, the kind of day that smelled faintly of rain and endings, and Sadie had the distinct sensation that something was about to go wrong. She had learned, in her 19 years, to trust that sensation. She heard her stepmother before she saw her, the precise click of Lady Aldrich Hawkins's heels on the parquet. Each step deliberate, each pause calculated. Lady Aldrich entered the drawing room the way she entered every room, as though she had already decided what was going to happen in it. She was a handsome woman, Sadie's stepmother. No one could deny that. Tall, composed, with dark hair arranged in a style that communicated both fashion and discipline, she possessed the kind of beauty that had always seemed less like a gift and more like a weapon she had learned to carry. She was not cruel in any dramatic way. She was simply efficient. And efficiency, Sadie had come to understand, could be its own form of cruelty. Behind her, hovering in the doorway with the expression of someone who very much wanted to be elsewhere, was Millicent, Sadie's half-sister, 17 years old, all golden curls and anxious eyes. Millicent was the one who had Lady Aldrich's cheekbones and their father's tendency toward panic. She shot Sadie a look that said, plainly, "I am sorry for whatever is about to happen." Sadie closed her book. Lady Aldrich sat across from her, folded her hands in her lap, and said, without preamble, "You are to be married." Sadie heard the words. She understood them individually. It was their arrangement, their specific, directed arrangement, that required a moment to absorb. "I beg your pardon," she said, and her voice was admirably level. "To the Duke of Redfield," Lady Aldrich continued, as though Sadie had not spoken. "The contract is already drawn. The ceremony will take place in 3 weeks. Time, at the chapel on his estate in the northern province." The room went very still. Even the curtains seemed to stop moving. "The Duke of Redfield," Sadie repeated slowly. She knew the name. Everyone in every drawing room from the capital to the coast knew the name. Rupert Redfield, the 6th Duke of Redfield, who had gone to the wars a celebrated officer and returned with a cane and a reputation for making anyone who looked at him with pity deeply regret it, who had not attended a single social function in 2 years, who was said to be, depending on who was doing the saying, either reclusive, damaged, terrifying, or all three simultaneously. "He requires a wife," Lady Aldrich said. "He has made inquiries. An arrangement has been reached that satisfies his requirements and resolves certain pressures facing this household." "Debts," Sadie said flatly. "You mean debts?" Lady Aldrich did not flinch. "I mean obligations. Your father, God rest him, left this family in a position that requires creative management. The Duke's settlement is more than generous. It will ensure Millicent's season, the maintenance of this house, and the comfort of this family for the foreseeable future." "And what," Sadie asked, "does it ensure for me?" A very small pause, the kind that contained an answer Lady Aldrich did not intend to give. "The title of Duchess," she said, "security, a great house, more than most young women of your particular situation could reasonably expect." Sadie's particular situation. She did not miss the phrasing. Her particular situation was that she was the daughter of the late Lord Hawkins's first marriage, before Lady Aldrich, before Millicent, before the debts and the faded curtains. Her particular situation meant that she had no dowry to speak of, no powerful connections of her own, and a stepmother who loved her stepdaughter precisely as much as was required for social appearances, and not a fraction more. She looked at Millicent, still hovering in the doorway. Millicent's expression had gone from apologetic to something worse. Relief. Because the Duke had asked, and Lady Aldrich had made a decision, and the decision had not been Millicent. And as much as Sadie loved her half-sister, truly loved her, in the complicated way of sisters who share a father and not much else, that look of relief made something hard and bright ignite in her chest. "I will not," Sadie said. Lady Aldrich's expression did not change. "But you will." "You cannot compel me to marry a man I have never met." "I can," said Lady Aldrich, with the serenity of someone who has already reviewed their options and found them satisfactory. "Make the alternative sufficiently unpleasant that you will choose this one." She rose from her chair, smoothing her skirts. 3 weeks, Sadie. I suggest you use the time to adjust your expectations rather than your objections. The Duke is not known for his patience, and neither, I'm afraid, am I. She left. Millicent made a small, wounded sound and disappeared after her. Sadie sat alone in the fading drawing room, the book still closed on her lap, and looked out at the garden, where the rose hedge had won. The chapel on the Redfield estate was 400 years old, and looked it, in the best possible way. Stone walls dark with age, narrow windows of coloured glass that threw fractured blues and greens across the floor, a ceiling that arched above like the inside of a prayer. Under different circumstances, Sadie might have found it beautiful. Under these circumstances, she found it a very elegant cage. She stood at the back of the chapel in the borrowed dress, ivory silk, slightly too long in the skirt, with sleeves that suggested a different era entirely, and looked at the man waiting at the altar. She had expected old. She had prepared herself, mentally, for old, or for something that matched the word broken, something diminished and pitiful that she could manage, that she could endure. She had not prepared for Rupert Redfield. He was tall, which the cane did not diminish, broad-shouldered, in a dark coat that fit him with the precision of someone who still dressed like a soldier, even if he no longer was one. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long for current fashion, and his face, the face that had watched her enter from 50 feet away with absolutely no change in expression whatsoever, was the face of a man who had once been, and perhaps still was, extraordinarily handsome. The jaw was strong, the eyes darker than she'd expected, set beneath brows that were currently arranged in an expression of complete and studied neutrality. He leaned on the silver-tipped cane with the ease of long practice, not leaning on it as on a crutch, but resting it at his side, like a man who has decided that if he is going to carry a burden, he will carry it with style. Sadie walked forward because she had decided, in the carriage ride here, that she would not give anyone, not Lady Aldrich, not the assembled witnesses, and certainly not the Duke, the satisfaction of seeing her hesitate. She would walk into this chapel. She would endure this ceremony, and she would then spend the considerable intelligence that God had given her figuring out what to do next. She reached the altar. She did not look at the officiant. She looked at the Duke. Up close, his eyes were not just dark. They were a deep, particular shade of brown, almost amber at the edges, and they were watching her with an expression that she could not immediately classify. Not cruelty, not triumph, not the look of a man who had purchased something and was pleased with his purchase. It was, she would think later, the look of a man who was not sure what to do with a surprise. "Miss Hawkins," he said. His voice was low, even, precisely modulated. The voice of a man who had learned to keep his volume down because he had discovered that quiet voices command more attention than loud ones. "Your Grace," she said. And then, because she had decided she would not pretend, she added, "I want you to know that I am here under protest." Something moved across his face, very fast, almost imperceptible. It might have been amusement. It was difficult to be certain. "I'm aware," he said. "I simply wanted to ensure that we began this arrangement with honesty rather than performance." He was quiet for a moment. Then, a reasonable preference. The officiant cleared his throat. They were married in 14 minutes. It was, Sadie thought, the most efficient catastrophe of her life. Redfield Hall was not what she had expected, which was becoming a theme. She had imagined something grim, a Gothic pile of stones, all gargoyles and draughts, and the pervading sense of accumulated misery. What she found instead was a house of surprising elegance, wide corridors lined with portraits and maps, rooms that were large without being cold, windows that caught the morning light and held it like something worth keeping. The gardens were immaculate. The library, she saw it briefly through an open door as she was escorted to her rooms, was enormous. The housekeeper, Mrs. Parton, was a small, efficient woman of perhaps 60, who had the look of someone who had served this family for so long that she had developed her own opinions about it. She showed Sadie to a suite of rooms in the east wing, a bedroom, a sitting room, a dressing room that had clearly been prepared with care. Fresh flowers on the dressing table, a fire already laid. Books on the side table, which suggested either coincidence or that someone had done a small amount of research. "The Duke takes his dinner at 7, Mrs. Parton said, "unless he has been writing, in which case it may be 8 or later. He prefers the small dining room. He does not require conversation at breakfast, but does not object to it at dinner. He walks the grounds every morning, weather permitting, beginning at 6. He does not wish to be disturbed in his study between 2 and 5 in the afternoon." Sadie listened to this recitation of a man's habits with the attention of someone being briefed before entering contested territory. "And does he have any preferences," she asked, "regarding his wife?" Mrs. Parton considered this with the care of a woman choosing her words from a range of available truths. "His Grace," she said, "has not previously had a wife. I expect he will find the adjustment requires some navigation on both sides." A pause. "He is not unkind, my lady. I would want you to know that." Sadie absorbed this. But he has been alone a long time," Mrs. Parton said, and he has become comfortable with that. She said comfortable the way one says comfortable when one means something more complicated. He will not make it easy for you to know him. That will not be a reflection of your worth. It will be a reflection of his habit. It was, Sadie thought, the most honest thing anyone had said to her in weeks. She thanked the housekeeper with the first genuine warmth she had felt all day. Dinner that first evening was in the small dining room, which sat 12 but was laid for 2 at one end of the long table. The Duke was already seated when she arrived. He stood when she entered, automatically, she thought, from ingrained manners rather than any particular attention, and waited until she was seated before resuming his own chair. The distance between them at the table was approximately 6 feet. It felt, in the silence, considerably larger. A footman poured wine. Soup appeared. Sadie looked at the Duke. The Duke looked at his soup. Mrs. Parton informs me, Sadie said, because the silence was beginning to acquire a personality, and she did not like that personality, that you have a library with approximately 4,000 volumes. The Duke looked up. Closer to 6, he said. The catalogue hasn't been updated since my father's time. I saw it briefly as I came through. The geography section appears substantial. A pause. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. You notice the geography section. The spines are more worn than the others. Someone has been reading them. My father travelled extensively before his health declined. I inherited both the books and the habit of reading them. Have you travelled yourself? Extensively, he said, and then, with a flatness that closed the subject like a door, the wars took me to several continents. I found them educational, in the way that catastrophes tend to be. Sadie did not press. She had the sense that this was a man who offered information in small, carefully chosen doses, and that to reach for more than was offered would result in receiving nothing at all. She could work with small doses. She had time. I would like access to the library, she said instead, if that is acceptable. The house is yours, he said. And there was something in the way he said it, not expansive, not generous, but careful, as though he was recalibrating what those words now meant, that made her look at him more closely. He was looking at his wine glass. His left hand rested on the table, and she noticed, for the first time, the faint trace of a scar along the back of it, pale against the olive of his skin, a remnant of something she did not yet know. Thank you, she said. He nodded, once, and returned to his soup. It was not, Sadie reflected, what one would call a warm beginning. But it was not cold either. It was something more interesting than either. It was wary. And wary, she had always found, was something you could work with. She had prepared herself, with grim practicality, for the wedding night. She had told herself that it was a thing to be endured, that worse things had been endured by women in worse circumstances, and that she would manage. What she had not prepared for was the knock at her door at 10:30, and the Duke standing in the corridor, fully dressed, holding a candle with the expression of a man who has rehearsed what he wants to say, and is not entirely certain the rehearsal was sufficient. I wanted to say, he began, and stopped, tried again. I am aware that this situation is not one you entered willingly. Sadie stood in the doorway of her room in her dressing gown, her hair loose around her shoulders, and looked at him. No, she agreed. I want to assure you, he said, that I will not, that I have no intention of… He stopped again. His jaw tightened. The way a man's jaw tightens when he finds himself saying something that requires more vulnerability than he has budgeted for. I will not require anything of you that you have not, that is not offered freely. The candle in his hand was entirely steady. His eyes, however, were not. There was something behind them, a careful, guarded thing, watching her reaction with the attention of a man who fully expected to be laughed at. Sadie felt entirely against her better judgment. A very small and inconvenient wave of something that was not quite gratitude and not quite softness, but was somewhere in the vicinity of both. "That is," she said, choosing her words with matching care, "a more considerate statement than I expected this evening." Something crossed his face. "I'm generally capable of consideration," he said. "I am simply not always capable of demonstrating it legibly." "I noticed," she said, and then, because it seemed important, "I will try to extend you the same courtesy, Your Grace. I cannot promise to be easy company, but I will try to be honest company, if that is of any value." He looked at her for a moment, a long, quiet moment, in which the candle flame moved slightly and cast shadows up along his face, softening the lines of it, making him look briefly like a younger man, a man who had not yet been to the wars. "It is of considerable value," he said, and then, before she could respond to that, "Good night, miss." He stopped. Sadie. Her name in his mouth was different than she had expected. Not the way one says the name of a stranger, something more careful than that. "Good night, Rupert," she said. His eyes moved to hers, just for a moment, startled, she thought, by the sound of his given name, as though it had been a long time since anyone had used it. He turned and walked back down the corridor. She watched him go, the candle casting a moving light ahead of him, his cane making its quiet sound on the stone floor, until he turned the corner and was gone. She stood in the dark doorway for a long time after. There was, between Sadie and the Duke of Redfield, a kind of careful architecture. Each of them had built their own structure of habit and distance, and for the first 2 weeks they inhabited those structures politely, the way two people share a large house without ever truly sharing the same space. She had access to the library, as promised. She took it up with the thoroughness of someone who has been underestimated for so long that access to knowledge feels like a form of revenge. She read everything: history, philosophy, the geography section that had been so well worn by his father's hands, and a shelf of military history that she began working through with the private intention of understanding something about the wars that had left him with a cane and a closed expression. He walked every morning. She watched him from the library window, not with the intention of watching him, but because the library window faced the east garden, and the east garden was where he walked. He was not slow. That was the first thing she noticed. Whatever had happened to his leg, he had not let it make him slow. The cane was a balance, not a crutch, and his stride was the stride of a man who is still, underneath everything, a soldier, purposeful, contained, covering ground. He walked as though the grounds were something he was still making peace with, as though the act of traversing this land, these gardens, was a conversation he had been having with himself for a long time. She found herself curious about him, which was inconvenient. She had not come here to be curious. She had come here in protest, under duress, and she had intended to remain in a state of righteous offence until some more agreeable arrangement could be negotiated. Curiosity was not part of the plan, and yet she found a notebook in the library, a leather-bound thing, tucked behind a volume of Mediterranean coast surveys, and opened it to find pages of precise, detailed sketches, maps mostly, but drawn with an attention to beauty that went well beyond the practical. A harbour somewhere in the south, a mountain pass, a city street rendered in such fine lines that the shadows between the buildings were implied rather than drawn, and you could somehow feel the weight of the afternoon sun. In the corner of each sketch, the initials R, R, F, and a date. He had drawn these. The Duke, the cold and reclusive Duke, had sat in foreign places during or after a war and made these extraordinary, delicate drawings. She replaced the notebook exactly where she had found it, behind the volume of surveys, and did not mention it at dinner. But she sat across from him that evening with the knowledge of those drawings between them, invisible and complicating, and looked at his hands where they rested on the table and thought, "Who are you, really?" The incident that began to shift things happened on a Wednesday, 3 weeks into their marriage, during a rainstorm. Sadie had gone to the stables. She had discovered a mare she liked enormously, a grey called Frost, and been caught by the sudden turn of weather on her walk back. She was making her way along the covered passage that ran between the stables and the house when she heard, through the thick stone wall, a sound she was not expecting. Someone was in the old tack room, and from the sounds of it, they were small, frightened, and trying very hard not to be heard. She opened the door to find one of the stable boys, perhaps 9 years old, with mud on his face and the particular expression of a child who has been crying and has decided to be extremely dignified about the evidence, crouched behind a saddle rack with a book held open in his lap. He scrambled to his feet when she entered, clutching the book to his chest. "My lady, I beg pardon, I wasn't." "Sit down," Sadie said, not unkindly. "What are you reading?" The boy looked at the book in his hands as though it might answer for him. Then, warily, "I found it in the rubbish from the old schoolroom, my lady. I know I shouldn't have." "Let me see it." He handed it over. It was a primer, an old one, the pages foxed and loose in the binding, but legible, an alphabet primer. "You're teaching yourself to read," Sadie said. The boy's chin came up. "I'm trying. I haven't got very far." "How far have you got?" A pause. Then, with the desperate honesty of someone who has decided they have nothing to lose, "Up to F." Sadie looked at this child, this 9-year-old boy crouching in a tack room in the rain to teach himself to read from a discarded primer, and felt something move in her chest that was entirely familiar. It was the feeling she had had in her father's house, in the years after Lady Aldrich arrived, hiding in the servants and stairs with a candle and a book. The feeling of reaching for knowledge with both hands because someone else had decided you weren't supposed to have it. "My name is Sadie," she said. "What's yours?" "Tom, my lady." "Well, Tom, I am going to teach you G through Z, and then we are going to start again from the beginning. Properly." She sat down on a saddle rack. "Come here." Tom looked at her with the expression of someone who is not entirely sure whether this is a rescue or a different kind of trap. Then he sat down beside her and opened the primer. She did not know that the Duke had seen them. He had been crossing the passage when the rain began and had taken the same covered route from the grounds and had paused at the open door of the tack room, the door she had left open because the rain outside made a kind of curtain across it, and seen his wife sitting on a saddle rack in a rain-damp dress, patiently pointing at letters in a battered primer, while a stable boy repeated them with the intensity of someone diffusing something fragile and important. He stood in the corridor for 2 full minutes, watching through the gap in the door, and then walked on. At dinner that evening, he was quieter than usual. Sadie, who had become accustomed to calibrating his silences, noted that this one was different, less the silence of withdrawal and more the silence of someone who is thinking about something that has surprised them. "Tom in the stables," the Duke said eventually, over the second course. How did he seem? Sadie looked up. Determined, she said, and rather further along with his alphabet than F. The Duke looked at his wineglass. He arrived on the estate 6 months ago, from the workhouse. I know, Sadie said. He told me. A pause. I had intended to arrange schooling, Rupert said, and the way he said it, slightly clipped, the words coming out at an angle, like someone admitting to something they feel they should have done sooner, told her more than the sentence itself. It was on a list. The estate management has a great many lists. Then perhaps, Sadie said, keeping her voice light, it can be moved toward the top. He was quiet for a moment. Then, yes. And then, I'll speak with Mrs. Parton tomorrow. She looked at him. He was still looking at his wine. The candlelight made the amber of his eyes more visible. And she thought, not for the first time, the notebook in the library, the harbour, the mountain pass, the shadows in the streets. You have a talent for it, she said. Seeing what needs to be done, I suspect you also have a talent for ensuring it happens. You simply... She paused, choosing the word carefully. Delegate the needing to yourself and forget the happening. His eyes came up to hers. It was not quite a smile. She had not seen him smile yet, not truly. But something in his expression shifted, an opening of something that had been held shut. That, he said, is a more accurate assessment than I would like. I am generally accurate, she said. I'm beginning to understand that, he said, and he picked up his wineglass, and something had changed between them without either of them quite doing anything to change it. And dinner continued, and it was warmer than it had been. She returned to the sketchbook. She had been telling herself, for 2 weeks, that she had replaced it exactly as she found it, and that was that. A small, private thing she had stumbled upon and had no claim to. But the drawings followed her out of the library and into her sleep. And one afternoon in late October, she went back, drew the book from behind the survey volume with the care of someone handling something fragile, and carried it to the window seat. She went through it slowly this time, every page. The harbour she had seen before, the mountain pass, the city street with its implied afternoon heat, a river crossing somewhere northern, the water rendered in pale cross-hatched lines, a field after a battle. She understood it was that without being told, by the absence of people in it and the quality of the stillness, the way the grass lay wrong. She looked at that one for a long time. At the back of the book, on the last 3 pages, the drawings changed. They were not foreign. They were here. The Redfield grounds, the rose hedge, the greenhouse seen from a distance in morning light. And on the final page, small and precise and undeniable, the library window, from outside, with a figure seated in it. A woman, her hair loose, a book open in her lap, her face turned slightly toward whatever was beyond the page. It was her, drawn from the garden, from below. Drawn recently. The date in the corner was 3 weeks ago, which was 2 weeks before she had first found the sketchbook, which meant he had replaced it here himself, which meant she sat with that knowledge for a very long time. That evening, she carried the sketchbook to the small sitting room where Rupert was reading after dinner, set it on the table beside his chair, and sat down across from him without saying anything. He looked at the sketchbook, then at her. Something moved across his face that was not quite alarm and not quite resignation, but contained elements of both. You found it, he said. Behind the survey volume, she confirmed. Some weeks ago. I see. He looked at the book, did not reach for it. I should explain. You don't have to, she said. I simply wanted you to know that I had seen them. A pause. All of them, including the last page. The fire was doing something quiet and steady in the grate. Outside, the October wind moved through the grounds. I draw what I find worth looking at, he said, and his voice was very careful, in the way of someone delivering a truth they have not yet decided is safe to deliver. I have drawn those grounds for years. The compositions have shifted recently, shifted toward the library window. Yes, Sadie looked at him. He was looking at the sketchbook, and the line of his jaw was the line of a man holding still against the pull of something. Rupert, she said. He looked up. I'm glad you drew it, she said simply. I am glad that I am in it. He was silent for a moment, the particular silence of a man receiving something he had not allowed himself to anticipate. Then, quietly, so am I. She picked up her book. He picked up his. The sketchbook sat on the table between them, open to nothing, but present. A small, declared thing in the space they were slowly, carefully learning to share. She found him, on a Thursday evening in October, in the old greenhouse. She had not been looking for him. She had been looking for Mrs. Parton to discuss the organisation of the East Wing linen closet, which had a system that no one currently living could fully explain. The greenhouse was off the covered path, its glass walls fogged with warmth and the smell of earth and growing things, and the door was slightly ajar, which was how she came to open it. He was at the far end, standing at a workbench among the terracotta pots and the trailing vines, and he was not aware of her yet. He had set his cane against the bench, and he was using both hands to do something with a small plant. Repotting it, she realised, pressing the earth carefully around the roots with those large, scarred hands. He was working with complete concentration, his head bent, his shoulders not quite as square as they were when he knew someone was watching, and his face, the face she had been reading for weeks now, learning its configurations and their meanings, was open in a way she had never seen it. Unguarded, almost young. His left leg, bearing full weight without the cane, trembled almost imperceptibly at intervals. A fine tremor, regular, like an instrument trying to hold a note it could no longer quite sustain. He had learned to keep still at those moments, she realized, had learned that the trick was not to shift weight, but to hold it, to refuse to give the leg the permission to fail. She understood, watching him, the daily arithmetic of it, the constant, silent calculation of where to stand, when to move, how to appear entirely untroubled by a body that was quietly, regularly betraying him. He had been doing this every day for how long? Since the war. 3 years, every room, every corridor, every dinner table, the same negotiation, invisible to everyone who was not watching closely enough. She had been watching closely enough. She made a small sound, not deliberately, but enough. He heard it. His hands went still on the pot. His body stiffened, not dramatically, but with the particular quality of a man who has been seen doing something he was not prepared to be seen doing. He did not turn around immediately. When he did, his expression had rearranged itself into its usual careful neutrality, but she had seen what was underneath, and they both knew it. I was looking for Mrs. Parton, Sadie said, because giving him a reason for her presence seemed kind. She will be in the kitchen at this hour, he said. His voice was even, controlled. Of course. She should have left. She knew she should have left. Instead, she said, "What are you repotting?" A pause. Then, as though deciding something, "Hellebore. They bloom in winter. He looked down at the plant. My mother grew them. She said it was useful to have something that bloomed when everything else had given up. Sadie was very still. She did not say anything. She understood, by instinct, that this was one of those moments where the wrong word would close everything, and the right word was no word at all. He pressed the last of the earth around the roots, smoothed it with his thumb, and then straightened. His hand found the cane. The neutrality settled back over his face, but differently, not as armor this time, but as a surface, with the knowledge of what was underneath it present between them both. I'll tell Mrs. Parton you were looking for her, he said. Thank you, Sadie said. She left the greenhouse, walked back along the covered path in the soft October rain, and sat down in the library for a long time without opening a book. She was thinking about a man who grew winter flowers because his mother had taught him to, and who had spent 3 years learning how to make a damaged leg look undamaged, and who hid gentleness the way other people hid weaknesses. She was thinking that she was in a great deal of trouble. It was a night in November, late March, when the fire had burned down to embers, and neither of them had moved to add wood because neither of them particularly wanted the evening to end, that he told her. He had not planned to. She had not asked, had made a private decision, some weeks earlier, not to ask, because she understood that some things could only be given freely and would close permanently if reached for. She had simply been present and patient in the way she was patient about many things. And eventually, the space she had made was enough. It was a river crossing, he said, not looking at her, looking at the embers. In the north, late in the campaign, when we thought the worst was done. He was quiet for a moment. The intelligence was wrong. The far bank was held. We went in under fire. Sadie did not move, did not speak. She had learned the grammar of his silences well enough now to know that this one required no punctuation from her. I got most of my men across, he said. Not all of them. 3 didn't make it. Another pause. Longer. The leg was... There was a fall. In the river. Rocks. I didn't feel it at the time. Didn't know how bad until we were on the other side and I couldn't stand. He said this with the flatness of someone who has rehearsed the facts into smoothness to make them easier to carry. By the time a surgeon reached me, the damage was... It had been too long. He did what he could. And the 3 men, Sadie said quietly. Yes. The word was short and entire. It contained everything. The names, the faces, the specific weight of a commander's guilt, which is different from ordinary guilt because it is institutional, is sewn into the rank, is the price of the authority you accepted when you accepted the uniform. You blame yourself, she said. Not a question. I made the call, he said. The intelligence was wrong, but the call was mine. I could have waited. I chose not to. He turned the wineglass in his hand slowly. I have reviewed that decision approximately 10,000 times. I have not yet found the version where I choose differently and everyone lives, but I have not yet stopped looking. That, Sadie said, is not a guilt you will ever fully put down. I think you know that. Yes. But I think, she said carefully, that there is a difference between carrying it and being buried by it. And I think you have been, for 3 years, closer to buried than carrying. He was very still. The leg, she continued, is something that happened to your body. The grief for those men is something that happened to your heart. You have been treating them as the same thing, as one single damage, one single reason to withdraw from the world. But they are not the same. She looked at him. You did not fail those men by surviving. You failed no one by coming home with a cane. The silence after that was long and different in quality from the silences before it. When he finally spoke, his voice was not entirely steady. Where, he said, did you learn to see like that? I grew up, she said, in a house where I had to understand what people were actually saying beneath what they were saying. It is a useful education. He set down the wineglass. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with the urgency of the moment that was still to come, but with a quietness that was more intimate than urgency, a deliberate choice, a man deciding, slowly, to put something down. I have not told anyone that before, he said, not all of it. I know, she said. I find, he said, that it is slightly lighter, having said it. It will be lighter still, she said, each time after this. She turned her hand in his. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. That is what I'm here for, not as a transaction, as a choice. He looked at her in the firelight for a long moment, and then he said, very quietly, Thank you, Sadie. Always, she said. The autumn assembly in the local town was, by the standards of the provincial social calendar, an event of some significance. It was also, Sadie understood from Mrs. Parton's careful explanations, the first social engagement the Duke had agreed to attend in over 2 years. He had agreed to it, reluctantly, and with stipulations, because she had mentioned, in passing, during a dinner at which they had been talking more freely than usual, that she had not danced since her father's last birthday party. She had not intended it as a petition, but something in the way she had said it, not wistfully, exactly, but with the particular quality of someone noting an absence they had stopped expecting to fill, had apparently worked on him. He had told her, the following morning at breakfast, in the tone of someone issuing a matter-of-fact instruction, that they would be attending the autumn assembly on Saturday. She had looked up from her toast. We, if that is agreeable to you, he said, and looked back at his newspaper with the focused attention of a man who is not going to acknowledge that he just did something thoughtful. It is, she said, and returned to her toast, and smiled at it, privately, where he could not see. The assembly rooms were warm and crowded, a condition the local gentry appeared to find entirely desirable, and the Duke of Redfield's arrival with his new Duchess caused precisely the level of sensation that Sadie had predicted and that he had anticipated with grim fatalism. She felt the room adjust itself around them, conversations dipping, resuming louder, eyes moving across them with the practiced indirection of people who have been trained not to stare, but have stared anyway. She watched him receive this attention with the absolute stillness of a man who has decided that the only available response to being looked at is to look back. He was not cold. Exactly. He was contained. He stood with the cane easy at his side and nodded to those who approached with greetings, and his responses were measured and complete, and no one would have described him as warm. But no one could have called him diminished. They were watching his leg. That was the centre of it. That was what every polite glance and careful non-stare was actually doing, checking for the cane, reading the damage, making their private assessments. She felt a wave of something fierce and protective that surprised her with its intensity. The dancing began. She did not ask him. She had not planned to ask him, had not even considered it possible. It simply arose in her, fully formed, the way certain decisions do. She turned to him, and he was watching the floor with an expression that contained, very deeply buried, something she now knew how to read. The look of a man who wishes and expects not to receive. Dance with me, she said. He looked at her, One dance, she said, the slow one. I've been watching the floor and there's a position near the window where no one will be behind you. She said this last part without inflection, matter-of-factly, because offering him dignity was more important than performing the consideration. Something moved behind his eyes, complex and rapid and not entirely comfortable. I have not danced, he said, since before the war. Then it will be new for both of us, she said. I am rather out of practice myself. A very long pause. The music changed, a slow waltz as she had predicted. The floor shifted and opened. He gave her his hand. They took the position near the window, as she had suggested, and she was not going to pretend that the first few steps were not an act of will on his part. She felt the adjustment in his grip when the rhythm required a shift of weight, felt the steadiness he was constructing in real time out of determination and long practice. He was not graceful, not exactly, but he was present. Entirely, completely present in a way he was not always. As though the act of this, the music, her hand in his, the necessity of moving through space together, had stripped away the careful structure he maintained and left something more essential. His hand at her waist was warm. His eyes, when they met hers, which they did, more than required by the dance, were open in a way she had only glimpsed twice before. In the greenhouse, among the hellebore, in the corridor outside her room on their first night. You are managing quite well, she said, quietly, so only he could hear. I am managing at all, he said, because you chose a position where no one is behind me, and I can calculate the floor. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but its cousin. That was not accidental. No, she agreed. You make a habit, he said, of doing things quietly that require a great deal of thought. I prefer that to making a fuss about the thought and forgetting to do the thing. He looked at her. The music moved them through a turn, and he managed it. And there was something in his face at the completion of it, not triumph, which would have been the wrong thing, but a settling. A man finding out that something he had been afraid of was survivable. Sadie, he said, and it was different than before, not careful and controlled, but something less guarded, more direct. I owe you an honest statement. You owe me nothing, she said automatically. I do, he said. You did not choose this. I was aware of that before we married, and I proceeded anyway. Because I was persuaded that the arrangement was suitable, and I did not consider sufficiently what suitable meant for you. The hand at her waist tightened fractionally. That was wrong of me. I am sorry for it. Sadie missed half a step. She recovered it. The Duke, to his credit, simply adjusted. That, she said, when she had her voice under full control again, is the most words you have said consecutively since I have known you. Yes, he said, I am aware. And yet you said them anyway. I am working, he said, on the theory that honesty is better than silence, even when it is more expensive. She looked at him. He looked at her. The music was doing something slow and inevitable around them. It's a good theory, she said. I will return the expense. I came here in rage. I stayed in refusal. And somewhere between the library and the greenhouse and a dinner where you agreed to arrange schooling for a 9-year-old in a tack room, I stopped being simply angry. A pause. I am not entirely sure what I am instead, but it is not anger. He did not respond immediately. The dance moved them through one more turn, and then the music gentled toward its close, and they slowed, and stopped, and stood. I think, he said quietly, that we might be something new. Neither of us has a word for it yet. I can be patient, she said. The corner of his mouth moved again, fully this time. A smile, real and rare and a little uneven, as though it hadn't been used recently and needed a moment to find its shape. I'm beginning to understand that you are patient about a great many things, including the things you have every reason not to be patient about. She felt something in her chest that she recognized, with a kind of helpless clarity, as the point of no return. It was inevitable, perhaps, that the progress they had made would be tested. Growth without friction is not growth, it is simply drift. And the argument, when it came, arrived in the way real arguments always do, not over the thing it was actually about, but over a smaller thing that happened to be carrying the weight of the larger one. It was a letter from Lady Aldrich. Sadie received it one morning in November, 3 months into her marriage, and read it at the breakfast table with a stillness that the Duke, across from her, noticed but did not immediately comment on. The letter was, in Lady Aldrich's particular style, efficient and warm in its surface and cold in its intentions. It inquired after Sadie's health. It mentioned Millicent's upcoming season. It noted, with careful casualness, that the Duke's settlement had resolved the most pressing of the family's obligations, and that Lady Aldrich hoped Sadie understood the extent to which she had, the phrase was used without irony, served her family, as though she had brought them a tray. She set the letter down. She picked up her tea. She set the tea down. Is it bad news? Rupert asked. It is my stepmother's particular form of good news, Sadie said. Which is to say, good news for her conveyed in a manner designed to ensure I feel the appropriate gratitude for having made it possible. Rupert was quiet. And she reminds me, Sadie said, and her voice had taken on the particular quality it acquired when she was managing something difficult, that I have served my family. That phrase, served, she looked up, as though a daughter is a resource to be deployed. She is not wrong, Rupert said carefully, that the settlement resolved the family's debts. Sadie looked at him. That is, he stopped. I mean that the practical outcome. I know what you mean, she said. Her voice had gone flat. You mean that the transaction was a sensible one, and that the results are satisfactory, and that perhaps the manner in which it was executed is a secondary concern relative to the outcome achieved. He had the look of a man who has said the wrong thing and is attempting to determine how wrong. That is not what I meant, he said, but there was a hesitation in it. The hesitation of a man who is not entirely sure that it isn't what he meant. It is exactly what you meant, Sadie said. She stood up from the table. She was not going to cry. She was furious, which was better than crying, fiercer and more useful. You are an intelligent man, Rupert, and I have given you considerable credit for it. But I want you to hear me clearly. I am not a problem that was solved. I am not a resource that was deployed. I am a person who was handed to a stranger to pay off a debt she did not incur. And the fact that the stranger has turned out to be... She stopped. Her voice was not entirely steady. She made it steady. The fact that this is not as terrible as I feared does not erase the terms of the original transaction. The room was very quiet. No, Rupert said. He said it with a quietness that was different from his usual quiet, lower, more fundamental. It does not. Then please do not, she said. Speak about it as though it does. She walked out of the breakfast room. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard his cane on the floor behind her. Sadie. She stopped, did not turn around. You are right, he said. I spoke carelessly, and not only this morning. He paused. When he continued, His voice had the quality she had come to recognize as his form of effort, the voice of a man pushing past the point where he would have stopped. I arranged this marriage because I required one. I selected you. He paused on the word, and she understood that he heard what was wrong with it. Because the terms were convenient. I told myself that was enough. That convenience could become something livable. Another pause. I was not thinking about you. I was thinking about the problem. You are not the problem. She turned around. He was standing 6 feet away in the corridor, his cane in his left hand, and his face was doing something she had only seen it do twice before. It was entirely undefended. No neutrality, no studied control. Just a man who had said a thing he could not unsay and was not trying to. No, she said. I am not. I know that now, he said. I knew it before now. I am not practiced at. He made a short, frustrated gesture, the gesture of a man fighting his own language. I have spent 3 years ensuring that nothing could get inside my defenses. You have been dismantling those defenses for 4 months by being relentlessly yourself. And I have not been telling you what that cost me, because I did not know how. Sadie looked at him for a long moment. What does it cost you? She asked. Everything, he said, simply. It costs everything. And I find that I would pay it. He met her eyes. That I am already paying it. She crossed the distance between them in 4 steps, and the thing that happened next was not entirely graceful. She was reaching for him, and he was already moving toward her, and the cane was between them briefly, before it was not, and the kiss that she intended to be an answer came out as something fiercer and more complicated than that. It was not a soft kiss. It was the kiss of 2 people who have been holding something at arm's length for months and have finally, completely, given up. He kissed her back with the same energy, one hand in her hair, her hands gripping the lapels of his coat. And somewhere in the middle of it, the anger transmuted into something else. Something that was its own form of heat, but gentler. A confirmation, a decision made by both of them, without deliberation, but with complete conviction. When they separated, the corridor was very still around them. Well, Sadie said. Her voice was not entirely steady. Yes, Rupert said. His was not either. They stood in the corridor, 2 feet apart, breathing. I am still angry, she said, though it was less true than it had been 5 minutes ago. I know, he said. You should be. I behaved badly, and I will work to be better. A pause. I am somewhat better than I was 4 months ago, I believe. You are considerably better, she said. Don't make me tell you that too often, or it will go to your head. The smile, the rare, uneven, genuinely his smile, appeared. I wouldn't presume, he said. It happened the way certain inevitable things happen. Not with announcement, not with the dramatic architecture of a scene designed for it, but quietly, in the middle of an ordinary evening, when both of them had simply stopped pretending that ordinary was what they wanted. She had been reading in the library. He had come in an hour after dinner, as he sometimes did now, and settled into the chair across from hers, with a book he did not open. She was aware of him not opening it. He was aware of her being aware. This particular awareness had become, over the weeks since the kiss in the corridor, a presence of its own in every room they shared. A third thing, patient and insistent, waiting. You're not reading, she said, without looking up from her own page. No, he agreed. Neither am I, she said. She looked up. He was already looking at her, had been, she suspected, for some time, with an expression that was entirely open and entirely his, the expression she had been watching slowly emerge over months from behind the layers of war and withdrawal. He was not performing composure, he had simply run out of reasons to maintain the distance. "Sadie," he said. Her name in his mouth still did something to the air. "Yes," she said, not as an answer to a question, as a decision. He understood. Of course he understood. He had always been, beneath the silence, exceptionally good at understanding her. He set his book aside. She set hers aside. He rose from his chair, and the cane was there. And it did not matter. She had long since stopped seeing it as anything other than part of him. The way the scar on his hand was part of him. The way the slight hesitation in his step was part of him. All of it woven into the person she had been falling toward without permission for months. She went to him rather than waiting for him to come to her, which was, she would think afterward, entirely characteristic of both of them. What followed was not a performance of romance. It was better than that. It was two people who had been honest with each other about difficult things, discovering that honesty extended here as well. That the same quality of attention he brought to his drawings and she brought to her reading was available in this room, in this quiet, in the specific and unhurried business of learning the language of another person completely. He was gentle where she had not expected gentleness. She was not gentle where he had not expected otherwise. They were both, in the end, surprised by each other, which was, she had decided some time ago, the best possible outcome of any encounter with any person worth knowing. Afterward, in the dark, with the fire reduced to a warm glow and the grounds outside the windows held in deep autumn stillness, he said, "I want to say something." "Say it," she said. "I was afraid," he said, "not of this." She understood he did not mean this. "I was afraid of wanting something this much and losing it. I have lost things. I know what that costs." A pause. "I kept you at distance because I was already losing the battle and I knew it, and I thought, if I did not acknowledge it, perhaps it would remain manageable." Was it, she said, manageable? A quiet, rueful sound that was as close to a laugh as she had heard from him before the assembly. "No," he said, "not for a single day." She settled closer against him. His arm tightened around her, not urgently, but with the particular quality of someone holding something they intend to hold for a long time. "It's not manageable for me either," she said. "I stopped trying to manage it somewhere around the greenhouse." "The hellebore," he said. "The hellebore," she confirmed. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the grounds. Inside, the fire breathed its last and went to embers, and neither of them moved to relight it, and the dark was entirely comfortable. It was Tom, of all people, who told her. Tom, who had advanced from F through the entire alphabet under Sadie's instruction, and was now reading with a ferocity that the Duke had accommodated by installing a small schoolroom in the East Wing and hiring a tutor. Tom, who had apparently formed an attachment to the Duke that expressed itself in the way of 9-year-old boys, through intense observation and the periodic delivery of unsolicited information. He found Sadie in the library on a cold afternoon in December and told her, with the directness of the young, that the Duke had told Mr. Carver, the tutor, that the idea for the schoolroom had been the Duchess's, and she was to get full credit for it if anyone asked. "He said that," Sadie said. Tom nodded. "He said he'd been meaning to do it for months and hadn't, and that was on him, and that you were the one who made it happen, so it was yours." Tom considered this. "I thought you'd want to know because you always look like you're not sure what he's thinking." Sadie looked at this 9-year-old boy with genuine respect. "That is a remarkably accurate observation, Tom." Tom shrugged, with the modesty of someone who knows they are good at something. "I watch him a lot," he said. He's the kind of man that you have to watch for a while before he makes sense. How long, Sadie asked, before he made sense to you? Tom thought about it seriously. About 6 weeks, he said. He brought me an apple once and didn't say anything about it. Just left it on the fence post by my bunk. I knew after that. Sadie sat with this image, the Duke of Redfield, walking through the stable yard, leaving an apple on a fence post for a 9-year-old boy from the workhouse and saying nothing about it, and felt something in her chest arrange itself into a configuration she recognized. Love was, she had always suspected, less dramatic than it was described. It arrived not in thunder, but in accumulated small things. An apple on a fence post, a schoolroom in the East Wing, winter flowers in a greenhouse. A man choosing the honest words over the comfortable silence, even when it cost him. A dance near a window, carefully positioned, where no one would be standing behind him. She had been falling for some time. She had simply, finally, arrived. She told him on a Sunday evening in December, when the first frost had settled over the grounds and the hellebore in the greenhouse were showing their first cautious blooms. She had been working up to it for a week, composing the statement in her head the way she composed arguments, with precision and clarity and the removal of anything superfluous. In the end, she said it at dinner, in the middle of a conversation about an entirely different topic, because that was when it arrived, fully formed and unwilling to wait. I love you, she said. I wanted you to know. It seemed important to say it plainly, rather than to perform it gradually and hope you eventually noticed. Rupert went completely still. Not the stillness of surprise, or not only that, the stillness of a man to whom something extraordinarily important has just been said, and who is applying the full force of himself to receiving it correctly. When, he said, it was not the question she had expected. I'm not certain of the exact date, she said. It was not a single moment. It was the notebook in the library, and the stable boy, and the dance, and the corridor after the argument. It was accumulated. She looked at him. When for you? He was quiet for a long moment. The chapel, he said. Sadie blinked. The wedding. You said you were there under protest. The ghost of the smile. You had been handed to a stranger in a borrowed dress to resolve a financial problem. And your first act upon arriving was to look me in the eye and tell me the truth. I had not. He stopped, took a breath. I had not been told the truth by anyone in a very long time. Not about myself, not about anything that mattered. He looked at her. I did not know what to do with it. I spent 4 months not knowing what to do with it. And now, she asked. Now, he said. I know. He set down his wineglass and looked at her with the open, undefended expression that had once been rare and was becoming. Slowly. His natural face. The face behind the face. The one that had always been there under the layers of war and loss and careful isolation. I love you. I have loved you since the chapel, perhaps, or since the library, or the greenhouse, or some particular evening at this table, when I realized that the house was not quiet anymore, and I did not miss the quiet. He held her gaze. You have made this a home. I did not know it required one until you arrived and showed me what it had been missing. Sadie sat across the table from the man she had walked toward in fury and arrived at in love, and let the warmth of that settle through her completely. That, she said, was considerably more poetic than I expected from you. I have been composing it, he said with perfect seriousness, for approximately 6 weeks. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that arrived without warning and couldn't be managed. and he watched her laugh with an expression that was unguarded and warm and entirely his. And then he laughed too, quietly, the sound of it new in the room, like the first note of something that had not yet been played here before, but intended to be played often. Later, much later, after the fire had burned low and the candles had shortened and the house had settled into its deep winter quiet, they sat together in the library. She was reading. He was drawing a new sketch, small and precise, of the grounds seen from the east window. She knew it was the grounds because she could see the faint lines of the rose hedge, and in the corner of the page, a small figure at the window who might have been her. He did not show her. She did not ask to see it. Some things were communicated in the knowing and not the showing, and they were both learning the grammar of that. The frost outside made the windows glow faintly with the light of a three-quarter moon. Somewhere in the greenhouse, the hellebore were blooming in the dark. Sadie turned a page of her book and thought, I did not choose this. I was brought here in anger, in grief, in the cold certainty of sacrifice. I arrived ready to endure and found, instead, something worth building. She thought, the best things, perhaps, are rarely the ones we would have chosen if left entirely to ourselves. The best things arrive like he did, unexpected, difficult, guarded and honest and full of quiet apples left on fence posts and winter flowers grown for a dead mother. And they ask of you not that you surrender, but that you stay and look and learn to read the language of a person who has forgotten how to be known. She thought, I am going to know this man entirely. It will take years. I have years. Across the library, without looking up from his drawing, Rupert said quietly, You're smiling. I'm happy, she said, with complete simplicity. He was quiet for a moment. Then, yes, he said, in the tone of someone reporting a new and remarkable natural phenomenon. So am I. She turned another page. He made another line. The frost held the grounds in pale light, and the house that had been silent was silent no more, full instead with the soft sounds of two people who have found, against considerable odds and through no small amount of stubbornness on both sides, that they are exactly where they are supposed to be. The spring assembly in town was, by unanimous agreement, the most attended event of the season, a development that Mrs. Parton attributed to the mild weather, and that Cook attributed to the improved refreshments, and that Tom attributed, with the confidence of someone who has been watching closely, to the fact that people wanted to see the Duke dance. He danced twice, both times with his wife. The first dance was a waltz, and he managed it with the ease of someone who has been practicing quietly in an empty ballroom on Tuesday evenings for the better part of a year, a fact that Sadie had discovered 3 months prior when she came looking for a book she had left in the music room and found her husband, in shirt sleeves, working methodically through the steps of a waltz to no music at all, counting quietly under his breath. She had watched from the doorway for 5 full minutes before he sensed her. When he turned, she had expected embarrassment. She had received instead a look of absolute, unrepentant determination. I am going to be better at this, he had said, than I am currently. I know, she had said, and went to find her book, and smiled all the way back to the library. Between the first dance and the second, Millicent found Sadie near the punch table. Her golden curls were slightly damp from the dancing, and her face had the earnest, worried look that it wore when she was being entirely sincere. I need to tell you something, she said. Her voice was different, not the anxious, appeasing voice she usually deployed. This voice was lower, more difficult. The voice of someone who has been sitting with a thing for a long time and has finally decided to put it on the table. Sadie turned to face her fully. Why, when Mother told us, Millicent said, when she told us it would be you, I was relieved. She said the word as though it tasted of something she was not proud of. I was relieved, and I let myself be relieved, and I did not say anything, and I did not object, and I... She stopped. Her chin was doing the thing it did when she was refusing to cry in company. I have been thinking about that relief every day since your wedding. I know, Sadie said, and I saw it on your face that morning. Millicent flinched. I was furious, Sadie continued. Not only at your mother, at you too, for a long time. She paused. It would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. You have every right to be. I do, Sadie agreed. And I also know that you were 17 and frightened, and that relief is not the same as intention. You did not put me in that carriage. You simply did not try to stop it. That is not a small thing, Millicent said quietly. No, Sadie said. It is a cowardice, but it is a cowardice I understand, and I would rather you own it plainly, as you are doing now, than perform a guilt that tidies everything into forgiveness before the debt has been acknowledged. Millicent absorbed this. So you don't forgive me? I am working on it, Sadie said. It is not a single decision. It is a series of them. She looked at her sister. You telling me this, tonight, directly, that counts. That is you being different from who you were that morning in the doorway. I noticed the difference. Is there anything I can do? Yes, Sadie said. Next time something is being decided over someone else's head, say something. You have a voice, Millicent. Your mother has spent years convincing you it is not useful. It is. Something settled in Millicent's expression, the look of someone who has been told a hard truth and has decided to be grateful for it rather than wounded by it. Write to me, Sadie said. Actually write, not through your mother. I want to know how your season goes. Millicent's chin wobbled slightly. I will, she said. The following morning, Lady Aldrich came to call. Sadie received her in the formal sitting room, not the warm library, not the breakfast room where she and Rupert spent their mornings. The formal sitting room, with its high ceilings and its deliberate elegance. The room that said, "You are a guest here. This is my house." Lady Aldrich entered in her customary manner, composed, assessing. She noted the room choice Sadie could see and recalibrated accordingly. They observed the rituals of tea. Lady Aldrich spoke about the assembly, about Millicent's prospects, about the quality of the weather. She was steering, Sadie knew, toward gratitude, toward the moment when Sadie would acknowledge that things had worked out rather well, hadn't they, all things considered? And Lady Aldrich had perhaps seen something that Sadie at 19 had not been equipped to see. Sadie let her arrive at it, let her make the turn. You seem so settled here, so at home. I confess I am glad that the arrangement proved suitable after all. And then she set down her teacup and said, with perfect pleasantness, I would like to speak plainly, if I may. Something flickered in Lady Aldrich's eyes. Of course. You sold me, Sadie said. Not in the dramatic sense of the word, but in the functional one. You identified a debt, and you used me to pay it, without my consent and without consideration of the cost to me. I want us to be clear that I know that, and that I have not forgotten it, and that my present happiness is not a retroactive justification of that decision. Lady Aldrich was very still. I am happy, Sadie continued in the same pleasant tone. Genuinely, more than I would have expected. But that happiness belongs to Rupert and to me. It is a thing we built. It is not something you gave me. She paused. I will not thank you for it. I will not perform gratitude for an outcome that was incidental to your intentions. Your intention was to resolve a financial difficulty. You did that. This, a small gesture at the room, at the house, at everything beyond it, is mine. The silence was, for the first time in Sadie's memory, entirely on her terms. Lady Aldrich looked at her with the expression of someone encountering a landscape that has shifted without warning. Still recognizable, but no longer navigable by the old maps. I see, she said. I am willing, Sadie said, to maintain a civil relationship, for Millicent's sake, and because my father loved you. But the terms have changed. She met Lady Aldrich's eyes. I am the Duchess of Redfield. If you wish to visit this house, you will come as a guest and behave accordingly. Lady Aldrich looked at her for a long moment. Then, with something that was not quite respect, but was the first cousin of it, You have changed. I have not, Sadie said. I have simply stopped being someone you could afford to overlook. The visit concluded with courtesy on both sides and warmth on neither, which was, she reflected, an honest result. Not forgiveness, not rupture, an accurate accounting. Rupert found her in the library afterward, sitting in the window seat with a book she was not reading, looking out at the grounds. How was it? He asked. Clarifying, she said. He sat down beside her, not across from her, beside her, close enough that his shoulder was against hers. He picked up his own book. Good, he said. She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. He turned a page. Outside, the spring was just beginning to arrive, tentative and pale green, and entirely sure of itself, the way springs always are, as though the cold of winter is simply a thing that gets left behind. The second dance was announced. Rupert came to find her. He appeared at her elbow with the quiet, precise timing of a man who has been keeping track of her in a crowded room without appearing to. He glanced briefly at the door through which Lady Aldrich had departed, a brief, assessing look, then offered Sadie his hand without a word. She took it. They took the floor. The music was the same slow waltz it always was, and the room was the same warm, watching room, and he moved through it with the ease of someone who has made peace with being seen, not despite his cane, not in spite of it, but entirely, simply himself. A man who had been to the wars and come home with a wound, and a wife who looked at both without flinching. She felt him relax into the dance, the particular release of a body that has stopped bracing. His hand at her waist was sure. His eyes, when they found hers, were steady and warm, and entirely without distance. You handled her well, he said, quietly. I handled her accurately, Sadie said, which is better. Yes, he agreed. The music moved them through a turn. Outside the tall windows, the spring evening was soft and pale, the sky holding the last of the light the way it does in that particular season, as if reluctant to let it go. I have been thinking, Rupert said, in the tone he used when he had been thinking about something for considerably longer than he was about to admit, that we should travel this summer. I have a list of places my father surveyed that I have never seen in person. Sadie looked at him. With the sketchbook. With the sketchbook. The corner of his mouth moved. And with you, if you are willing. I find my compositions have improved considerably with a better subject. She felt, in the chest, the thing she had stopped trying to name because it was larger than any single word. A warmth that was also a certainty, a happiness that was also a choice, daily and deliberate, the kind that does not arrive once and stay without tending. I am willing, she said. They danced. If Sadie and Rupert's story moved you, share this with someone who needs a love. What was your favorite moment? And follow for more.